Welcome to Business Question Time. I'm Maggie Pagano, editor of Reaction, and I'm delighted to be hosting this wonderful organization, which is bringing together young voices from business community and how they can help us in the future. It's all been set up by the great businessman Jürgen Mayer, called Vocal. And so here's a chance for the young and the old to be very vocal. Now we're actually waiting for one of our guests, Bima Falami, but we thought we'd start and he can sort of join us. Luckily with Zoom, he can creep into the scene. So Jürgen, I'm now going to ask all of you on the panel to just introduce yourselves, and then we'll kick off with some of the hopefully controversial and lively questions. Do you want to introduce yourself first of all, Jürgen?
Yeah, very happy to. And thank you very much, Maggie, for hosting us on this Vocal Business Question Time live. I'm the co-founder of Vocal, which, as Maggie had just said, is a responsible business movement. And we're particularly wanting to give a voice to next generation business leaders to speak out and be vocal about matters of responsible business. And it's brilliant to be joining the panel today.
Wonderful. And James Timpson?
Yeah, so I run our family retail business. So we've got 2,100 shops, little shops around the country. And I also chair the Prison Reform Trust and I'm Chancellor of Keele University. And I'm interested in culture, company, organizational culture, and the importance of kindness in an organization.
And then we have Riddhi Karam Belkar.
Hello, everyone. I'm Riddhi, and I'm joining Vocal as a future voice. And I'm extremely excited about talking about how businesses and can do more for our community and our society and the impact we can make. I work as a head of manufacturing engineering at Brompton Bicycles, and my education and past life has been in the automotive and aerospace sectors that I now look to put to good use. I think building on what James just said about how we can influence organizations going forward.
Wonderful, thank you, Riddhi. And then we're joined by Ben Frost, who is Digital Transformation Director at Crystal Doors. Sounds very grand, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ben Horn, and yeah, Digital Transformation Director at Crystal Doors. We are a small manufacturer in Rochdale, and we make doors and panels for the kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom industry. But this year we've reached net zero emissions, and we're working towards our outstanding B Corp certification. So we're very passionate about sustainable and ethical manufacturing. Great to be here.
That's wonderful. Thank you all very much. And there's just something that I wanted to drop into the conversation, sparked really by James's comment about your interest in culture and so forth. And that is that a couple of months ago, I looked up where the word business comes from. And it's actually from the Old English, besign, which means to be careful and diligent. So actually business in its very authenticity, if you like, was always responsible. So we've got to make it more responsible. And that's my first question. I was going to put Bim on the spot about what's going on with government now, but well, we can get to that later on. James, what do you think the next generation of business leaders want from government? And how can policymakers support a much more open and productive relationship with business?
Well, so our three kids are 24, 22, 20, and sort of just either into work or about to go into work. And what's fascinating is the things that they're looking for is very different from the things that I was looking for, my friends, when we were leaving university. Whilst wages are important, it's the values bit that is more important. And I think from what I'm seeing is that I think the reason why we attract people to work for our business is not because we pay crazy wages, we don't. It's because of the values and the fact people are trusted in the business. And I think one of the things that government needs to do is to understand that the way people work now and will work is different, and the motivations that people have is different. So one of the points around that is the fact that I don't think young people like being told what to do as much. They like to be guided and to be shown a way of doing things that work, but they don't like being sort of strong-armed into doing things. And I also think one of the things that I have seen is that it's no point in government telling us what to do if they're not doing it themselves. So when they talk about being efficient or looking after your people or caring for the environment, there's no point asking us to do it if they're not doing it. But I'll give you one thing that has really worked. Is a number of years ago, I was having a conversation with Michael Gove when he was Secretary of State for Justice, and he said, right, how can we get more businesses to employ people who are leaving prison? I said, well, to start off with, you can employ people who've been to prison. And he asked one of his assistants, so how many people do we employ from prison? 0. Anyway, the Ministry of Justice now employ 1,100 people with prison experience, which I think is fantastic. So I think the government, whilst they need to give us a vision and communicate well, they also need to do what they're asking us to do.
Show, not tell. And Jürgen, from your experience, what would you like to see now most at such a crucial time?
Yeah, well, I'm great at this point that we've got Bim joining us. So hi, Bim.
Welcome, Bim.
Yeah, I mean, I think really at this moment in time, just 2 things that we as a business community are looking for from government. Now, as specifically regards to the next generation, I think I'd like to leave that to Ben and Riddy, who are going to speak to that probably better than me. But what I'm hearing from the next generation and also broader business leaders is we want to really get messages that we can form a partnership and we can work with government that truly cares about our environment and cares about the climate. I think that is something that really matters to the next generation leadership. So that's one thing. So that, when messages, when communication, like James was just talking about, that in the language, there is always this point about we care about the environment around the climate. And the second thing is just to restore trust, because we've been through a period where, and it's been difficult, let's be clear, it's been difficult times, but there has been an erosion of trust in terms of good values, in terms of good integrity. And the thing I worry about is that if we don't fix this issue of trust, then what we do is we actually give permission to the sorts of business people who might want to get into business and not do the right thing. So they're setting up business to make a quick buck and maybe cut a few corners on environmental protection. And now the good news is that I firmly believe next generation business leaders and business does care about good values, good behaviors, and the environment. So therefore, my overall ask is, I'd like more partnership with that type of business, and to make sure that our policies are more geared towards, caring, environmentally responsible businesses.
Before I turn to Bim, give us some examples of what you mean by that trust, because it's an easy word to use, but actually, what would you like to see from that?
Well, I mean, at the sort of thing that people are seeing, it obviously is when we see parliamentarians, when we see the Prime Minister behaving in ways which don't seem to be the right sorts of behaviours, such as giving contracts to people without fair process, as being one example. But actually, that's the sort of the detail of it. What I was really meaning is that when communication happens from parliamentarians, from government, from all senior leaders, that the language is consistently about us caring about the green agenda, us caring about the environment. And I'm not sure that we consistently hear that. As a matter of fact, we hear quite contradictory things, like, we're now hearing about fracking being a key policy. which I'm not certain that either local communities are particularly impressed by, or indeed future business leaders would be that excited by.
Indeed. And so welcome, Bim. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you've got an awful lot to be doing right now. And we'll talk about that later.
Talking about, I can't imagine.
You can't imagine what it is.
No.
I thought you might be having, you know, Westminster corridor talk. But Bim, I don't know if you heard the question, but it was really, what does the next generation of business leaders want from government, and how can policies makers actually support a more productive and caring relationship with business? So you're the second part of the sense of the question.
So I mean, so I've been doing quite a lot of thinking about this and this whole question, and slightly in a heterodox way, I actually think that we think about this entire thing not fundamentally enough. And what I mean by that is not that there aren't policies that can help entrepreneurs and business. We know there are. It's not that certain levers you pull, whether it be tax, whether it be infrastructure or planning, or all of these things we know matter and they help business. We know that. However, a lot of smart people have spent a lot of time talking about a lot of these things over the last 10, 15 years. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of these good intentions haven't quite led to the outcomes that we've wanted. And a lot of people have been thinking, well, you know, you spent a lot of time working on this stuff, and why is it that things aren't improving? I think a core reason for that is we haven't dealt with the poor quality of a lot of our institutions. And I mean everything from the way how the government works, central and local, the way how Parliament works and politics works, the way how the NHS is structured and how it works, the incentive structures within it. And unless you deal with these foundational things, you know, so for example, you have a new policy on planning that says, I don't know, any new startup can build an extra building next to their existing office without any planning, and the idea being that it increases speed. I'm making that up, by the way. I'm not proposing that. I don't want any green lobby to have a go. But I'm just saying, imagine that if that were the policy. But unless you have planning departments and local authorities that work effectively, that can deal with challenge, that you aren't snared up in the courts for 12 years whilst you're arguing about it, that policy, though a good idea perhaps, doesn't really have the effect that it needs. We know in the NHS, which is now, by the way, 45% of government spending is NHS, 45%. And when we look at other countries, and I'm not now getting into the rabbit hole of whether other countries' system is good or is better than ours or not, but when you look at other countries, their spending, their government spending, as a percentage of their government spending, their health system is much lower because they have different types of systems. So they have more money to spend on other stuff. So if you're thinking about the NHS, actually making the institutions work really, really matters. And I'm not even getting into central government and local government and devolution and all of these things, unless you deal with this boring institutional plumbing. And that's everything from structures down to the people in it, the incentive structures within it, the morale of those people, how they're motivated, how they want to achieve, how long they stay in it, what they're paid. Unless you deal with the institutions, I actually think a lot of things in the private sector aren't going to work properly. And I think that that is something that I'm increasingly sort of thinking, which is a lot of our policies are good. A lot of our ideas are good. We're a great country with amazing people, but they're not having the effect they should do because the foundations have become shaky.
Do you think that is because, Ben, that I know the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years, but politicians think on a short-term cycle, 3 to 5 years, the next election. So they're thinking about a fix, putting the sticking plaster, rather than saying, what is the outcome we want? And then working to find, I mean, that an engineer, we have 3 of them here, you know, would say, what is it we want? And then have practical experience and theories. And so we're trying to do things too quickly, rather than saying, this is the goal, how do we best get there? And we could have a lot of cross-party support. Just take energy security. For 20 years, there's been no planning at all.
There have been, but I think that one person who I like a lot and who I think is rightly respected is Michael Gove in government. And the reason why people respect Michael Gove is not because people agree with all his ideas. And Michael will be the first to say that he has some, you know, interesting ideas that not everybody always agrees with. but it's because in education in particular, how they sought to tackle a lot of the problems that they had was they looked at the structures and the institutions that they were dealing with first, knowing that unless you deal with those things, all these things from Whitehall just sort of end up not really getting anywhere. And they did quite a lot of improvements over a relatively short period of time, 5, 6, 7 years. People were really noticing the school system getting better. And I just think that you can do institutional changes that make a difference over the short term as well as the long term. So I think this is compatible with electoral politics. It's not just a long-term, short-term argument, because I think that then becomes very difficult.
Okay. So Riddhi, let's go back to the beginning of the question, which is what is that your generation, your experience, what are the obstacles, if you like, that you see within government or within the administration, the bureaucracy that holds back?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I think what the very question, right, of what do business leaders want from government is going to differ, right, slightly from business to business, depending on what it is that they do. But I think there are certain things that we can fundamentally agree on that impact a lot of us. I think something that James touched on was the way business leaders are today are very different from the business leaders maybe 30, 40 years ago, in the sense of how we look, how we think, how we operate, what we wear. A lot of that is becoming very, what's refreshing is people are very true to themselves, very authentic to what they do. And the difference between sort of what we do and what we believe in is very refreshingly come together in these generations. People are getting, and that's where the magic is happening, in the sense of people are really inspired and care about what it is they do. And what we want from the government is that I think all of us can agree across businesses is, one, is that recognition of that dialogue, that communication needs to be very refreshing, very different. The same talks around, whether it's the same levers around tax or free trade or investment opportunities, etc. I think, like Bim mentioned, those same levers, I think talking about them over and over again aren't getting us the results we want. So I think we need to look at it from a much more collaborative approach. And there is I don't want, the only new thing I want to add to that is, I don't want to talk about it only as what we want from the government. I also feel like in order for us to help the government give us what it is that we want, I think there is a sense of responsibility on the future leaders of educating the policymakers around what it is, what are our challenges, like we mentioned at the start, what is specific to us that is really challenging, what actually does work, and how resilient our business models are, where, okay, if certain things move here and there, sure, it might be a thorn right now, but that's not going to kill us. This is, and I think that part of education is that collaborative approach that I feel where we could be a lot better at, in the sense of engaging that communication a bit better. So I guess in a nutshell, it's creating that environment where business leaders and the government can work collaboratively to influence those policies, review them, educate each other in the best possible way is something I think we can be better at going forward.
Yeah, that's very, very positive. It's fantastic. And Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Maggie, I must say, I love what you said a moment ago about how the government works on 3 to 5 year cycles often, in terms of thinking about their own re-election and what they can do to make a big impact in the media over that short-term period. But the challenge is businesses don't work on a 3 to 5 year period. And what's an even greater challenge is that, you know what else doesn't work on a 3 to 5 year period? The environment and sustainability. That's never going to work if we only have a 3 to 5 year plan in place. And the environment is something that the next generation of business leaders care a lot about. So I would say what we want is integrity from our government and from our government leaders, that they're going to put plans in action, not for the next 3 to 5 years, but plans that will be beneficial for businesses to invest in sustainability for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Because that's when this is really going to come to a crunch. And we've got to decide as a country, do we want our businesses to be playing catch up when it comes to environmental issues? and clean energy, or do we want to be ahead of the curve, leading the world and leading the economy in clean, green business?
A very fair point, Ben. Let's actually just skip. We'll go back to another question I had, and that is to look at the energy crisis we have now, which does mean that we are going to have to rely on dirty, old, nasty fossil fuels for some time to come. And it really interests me because not only my own children, but all their friends and so forth, are intransigent about this. And I wondered whether you, of the younger generation, accept that it doesn't mean that the goal of having clean energy has gone away. It is that we need to use the dirty old fossil fuels in between until we get there. Electric batteries for cars, they're going to be powered by gas or nuclear or something, because we simply don't yet have the resources. My own view is that technology, and it's going to be brilliant people like you, Ben, and Riddhi, who will develop the next technology, the next hydrogen. So you tell me how you feel about that. Do you sort of accept, and do you think the eco-activists are perhaps going too far? Or would you be hammering still on the government's door?
I'd be more than happy to jump in and give you my views on it. I think what you said at the beginning is absolutely right, where if we're using it, if you see a plastic bottle or you see something going against your philosophy, it doesn't mean you stop the message and stop the effort altogether, right? I think that ultimate goal of getting to a green planet is not going away. It's not. It will go away before that message goes away. So I think we need to absolutely keep it at the forefront and the center of everything, every decision we make, everything we do, including simple things like at Brompton, for example, within the manufacturing world, historically and within all of manufacturing, we used to always talk about SQDC, which was the safety, quality, delivery, and cost models for every project. And it was a set model across automotive, aerospace, and bike industries. Whereas now we've added an E element to that, which is safety, quality, delivery, cost, and environment. And I think thinking about that in every decision you make, something as simple as that, but it's made such a difference in sort of our approach to everything we do, where even starting to sort of quantify that impact of every decision has made us make some really good choices. Can we 100% become a completely zero company overnight? Absolutely not, because we still need steel, for example, to buy bike, and we don't have supply chain anywhere in the world right now that can give that to us with a zero impact. But does that mean we stop that mission? Not at all. I think we keep at it, and I think this is where the like you said, business minds and business leaders and engineers, designers, whoever it might be that should care about the topic, can invest in good innovation for the answer. We don't want to rely on outsourced energies of these good forms. We want to be self-sufficient. We want to be a homegrown country where we hear about these gigafactories, etc. And we want to see them, and we want to be a part. We want to play an important part in investing in that innovation as part of that solution.
James, I'm going to turn to you. And you let us into a secret. You let us into a secret earlier on, which is that it's great for your business when it rains. So clearly the environment and the climate is of great importance to your business. What do you think about the balance between the demand for net zero, but the fact that we don't have enough energy we don't have enough clean energy right now? We're working on it. Is that important in your business?
Well, we're slightly unusual in our business that we repair things. We repair watches and shoes, and we clean clothes, and we repair clothes. So we did a study with Lancaster University about the impact that we have as a business. And it was, I like to think that we thought we knew our stuff, but it's only when you see it written down in black and white of where you are contributing and where you're taking away, can you really start working out a plan of what we need to do. So we know we are using 40,000 tons of carbon to run our business of 2,000 shops and 4,500 colleagues. So from our point of view, it's really important that we get there, but it's important we know what we need to do, and there are lots of things we can do, but also there are certain things we need help with. because we as a business can't solve all of our problems without some government help.
No, absolutely. Perfect. Turn to you, Bim. There's obviously, with the new leadership, a fresh debate about the target for net zero, is there not? And there are some who would like to see it eased out, although we actually have a more critical crisis right now, which is we just need energy from wherever. And I think you're about to start a new tax on the renewables, just going to be introduced. Anyway, what is your feeling about the debate? And where are you on the debate?
Well, the Prime Minister has said, and it's important to note it, that she's committed to the 2050 date. Get that on the record. So I do think there are people around the party and the administration who would prefer to roll it out, but the Prime Minister herself is committed to the date. However, you've got a couple of problems here. Let me outline them. The first is there is a structural shortfall in the amount of energy required and the amount of energy produced globally that is growing year on year from now out till 2030. Okay, that's just a fact. When people say, oh, we need to use less energy, try saying that to somebody in Nigeria trying to just get a house for the first time, trying to just feed their family and home their family for the first time. Okay, so that is there. The lack of investment in oil and gas fields globally over the last few years has meant that, because I think what people fail to appreciate is it's not like you invest in a field and it's there forever. You have to constantly be finding and investing in fields just to keep everything moving. The lack of investment, due to a bunch of reasons, but one of which was the perception that it was wrong morally to hold shares in an oil company, for example. That lack of investment has meant that when you have a structural shortfall of energy and you end up with political problems like Russia, so you take them out of the global energy market, or at least for big parts of the global energy market, countries are going to be left with a choice. As the price of energy structurally goes up because the supply and demand imbalance, countries are going to be left with a choice. It's either they burn really dirty stuff like coal, which is much worse than oil or gas, or they get thrown out of office, whether it be a dictatorship or democracy. Eventually, if energy prices are high enough and food prices are high enough, governments fail. And politicians don't like to lose office, so what they will do is they will do whatever they need to do to keep the energy flowing. That will be worse for the environment. What I also appreciate, and I am very strongly pro-green. I'm a member of the Conservative Environment Network, one of the first MPs in my intake, my generation to be part of that. But at the same time as making sure you've got a bit of investment in oil and gas to keep the energy, you've also got to continue the huge scale up of investment that we've had in renewables and nuclear, so that you can grow that bit over time. The reason why I talk about, because I think it's really hard for people to appreciate that just because you're investing in oil today does not mean that you want that to be a long-term solution. It just takes a lot of time to get enough solar on stream, get enough wind on stream, get enough nuclear on stream, because in almost every country you've got other barriers that stop those things happening really, really quick.
No, and that was exactly my point. But you could see it once again as a really crisis in communication, because the last 20 years, no government, going back 25 years ago, has ever stood up and said, actually, we will have to keep fossil fuels and we will have to keep giving exploration licenses in the North Sea and whatever it was, to allow us to get to the next stage. But I think actually that, and it lacked courage on behalf both of the Labour government, it was Nick Clegg who said no more nuclear, was it not?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. But I actually think, as I say, as a proud environmentalist, I think a certain wing of the environmental movement deserves a lot of criticism for opposing nuclear, because by opposing nuclear and making it very difficult in a lot of countries, Germany being a very famous example, to invest in nuclear, you've got a situation in Germany where the country is burning coal rather than nuclear because of the ideological position of the Greens that are in their government. Now, that is a bonkers outcome for the climate. But because of an ideological opposition to nuclear, now, it's not quite the same in this country, but the difficulty in delivering nuclear is planning and regulation and various other things. which we need to try and improve. But the fundamental point here, I think, generationally, and I speak as trying to hang on to Riddy and Ben's coattails as being part of their generation, and I hope that they accept it, is that we have to make the case that investing in particularly natural gas is a transition fuel. It's not the end, and it's not evil for people particularly in poorer countries, because in the West we're very myopic, to want to be able to raise their standard of living. And they will do that in whatever way they can afford to do so. It's up to us to gradually wean ourselves off the fossil fuels and provide cheap, effective, renewable alternatives. But those things are going to take a long period of time. And we just have to be patient and honest enough to explain that to people.
I think honesty is very important, and politicians.
I'm my best, man.
Well, I know you do.
I always do my best for you, as you know.
Brilliant. We're getting lots of questions piling up, so I'm going to experiment and see if we can go into the Q&A from the floor. Sorry, let me just look and see if there are some that are on the same subject. Okay. This is from Mike Clargo. To what extent is our ability to do the right thing handicapped by our unwillingness to admit where we really are at the moment? Oh dear, Mike, where are we at the moment? In a crisis, I suppose. Is that, and by unwillingness, he means the difficulty about being honest about real progress.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to make a start on that one, and maybe also link it. Mike Clargo's asked a couple of questions, and another one he asked, which I think is sort of on a similar theme, is the issue here trust and communication, which both James and Bim were just talking about. And I think, look, people do understand where we are, which is that we are in an energy crisis. The Ukraine war has made that significantly worse, and yes, we are going to have to burn some transitional carbon fuels. And I think, people largely accept that. However, is there trust in people to say that we will really only do this for a temporary period, and actually our efforts to go to more renewable sources of energy will be accelerated as a result? And I'm not sure that trust exists. And if I can just take Bim's Germany point, Germany is in a much worse position than we are on this transition, partially because of the nuclear issue you described, Bim, but also because Germany is more reliant on Russian gas. So Germany is burning coal, but actually even the Green Party in the coalition has agreed to that, and they've agreed to it on the basis that they're going to accelerate the path towards other renewable sources to make sure that they actually get faster ultimately to net zero. And that is laid out in quite a transparent way, largely, I think, because of the way the coalition government works in Germany. And therefore, the nation is slightly more happy to run with it because they feel there is a path and there is a strategy and there is trust in that path that is being created.
Got another great question here for you, James, from Alex Hughes. And he asks, from your incredible experience, what is the one thing that businesses could do to engage with those who are less benefit, that aren't yet economically active, to inspire them and to work? And actually we saw, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the latest ONS numbers. The number of economically inactive is nearly 9 million people now, and 2.5 million in the older age group since COVID. I mean, it's a rather ghastly expression, and not, it includes students, it includes pensioners, but it's a big chunk of people, 4 to 5 million, who are not working and who could work for various reasons. What would you say to that?
There are very few people who leave school and university wanting to work for our business. So what we have to do is to make our business incredibly attractive for people to work in it. And that means that the people we often recruit are those who come from an unconventional route into work. So, one in 9 of my colleagues have been to prison. We have lots of care leavers, but I think because we have an environment that is very accepting to them, because they're brilliant when they get settled in. These are fantastic colleagues. So we're a business. We talk about the menopause all the time. It's normal in our business to talk about mental health. It's normal to talk about how we support people with their personal financial planning. These are the things that employers need to do to attract people who come from those groups. And you can't assume that people know how to work and how to be successful in work. But on the other hand, you have to have a culture, in our view, of kindness and trust, and back it up with really strong values that appeal to those kind of people. Because what we've found is that, for example, the people we recruit from prison are just as good as anybody else. And the fact they'll stay with us for longer, they're more honest, and they are quicker at getting promoted. So I think in some ways our business has benefited a lot by recruiting people with an unconventional start. And now, because the employment market is so difficult, more companies are trying to recruit from the same pool that we are.
Yeah, Ben, please do come in.
So James, you guys are a famously great business to work for, right? You guys are so well known for it. Why do you think it has been, though, that not that many businesses have taken a similar approach with you on prisoners? Because I've always been curious about this, like why is it that other businesses haven't taken that sort of proactive approach that you are rightly praised and known for? If it works so well, why haven't other businesses copied it?
Employers see their diversity strategy as recruiting people. This was take it 5 years ago. People of colour, people from different parts of the world, people who've left the military, and then we sort of moved to people who are care leavers. And it's only now, and I think one of the main reasons is COVID, and it's so difficult for people to recruit, that people see recruiting ex-offenders as part of their employment strategy of getting a diverse group to work with them. So I know it sounds sad, but it's partly out of desperation, but also when they've sort of recruited people from prison, they recognise that they're really good. So also the prisons are working much better at finding, connecting people up, those who leave prison to work. So, and it's one of these ones where the more business leaders that talk about it and openly do it, the more others are likely to follow. And I would say now most businesses I know will recruit people who have criminal convictions, which is fantastic.
Can I ask you a question? I've always wondered actually, is what sort of level of reoffending do you find across the group?
You're more likely to, my colleagues are more likely to go to prison if they've never been to prison before. So over the years, I must have recruited 1,500 people who were recruited when they were still in prison, and we know of only 3 that have gone back. That doesn't mean to say that it hasn't, it's not always successful, but I have directors, I have area managers. In fact, I was talking to 3 of my colleagues in our finance team this afternoon. They've all been to prison, but they're really good. And I don't judge them for what they've done. I just judge them for how good they are at their job and how kind they are to one another.
It's incredible what you've done. Bim, the government has actually, is doing quite a lot to try and bring back through its coaching and various mentoring schemes, which I think over the last year or so has been stepped up to bring some of these people back. Do you think there are other things, do you think that's sufficient? And how important do you think it is? Particularly, we saw the very tight labour market, 3.5% unemployment, it's extraordinary. We've got shortages in just about every area of the economy. How important is it, and what else do you think could be done?
I mean, there are a couple of things. The first is on the labour market. I think something very strange is going on because what you've got incredibly high levels of migration, incredibly high. Contrary to what a lot of people said after Brexit, actually, we have got very high levels of migration. At the same time as very low unemployment, as you've set out. But there is also after COVID, there was a significant number of people, and maybe somebody will know the number, but I think it's something like 300 or 350,000 older workers who just left the workforce and are out of work benefits, people taking out of work benefits through disability and other things that are not just job seekers allowance has also gone up quite a lot. So we've got a very weird labour market. My feeling on the labour market in this respect is that there are people in the wrong places. And I think they're very complicated reasons for that. Part of that is the cheapness of capital, which has meant you've been able to sustain zombie companies in fields where that capital shouldn't really have been employed there, it should have been employed somewhere else. And there are a lot of other reasons. There's problems around people moving around the country because of planning and not being able to get decent housing, which means that you're stuck in a job that you shouldn't really be in a certain part of the country, because in a more dynamic economy, you'd be able to move and be in the job you should be in and maybe earning more and being more productive. So I think the labour market is probably dealing with this is probably one of our biggest challenges as a country, because something very strange is happening. Every single sector seems to have shortages. Everybody seems to whine they can't find skills, high, middle, low, every region, every part of the country. And unless we can, and importing more immigrants, I'm afraid, isn't going to deal with the problem, because we've been doing that and it still hasn't dealt with the problem. So I think that some really detailed thinking about how we incentivize, particularly older workers who are, affluent older workers who live in places like in my constituency, a disturbing number of whom retire, they're not rich people, these are just relatively affluent people retiring very early. And I'm thinking, how can we take these highly qualified, capable people and get them in the workforce, because they can offer a huge amount to the country. They often used to, but they're out of it now. And I think that that's something that in particular happened after COVID. But I'd be interested in other people's views as to whether they've seen that in other countries, their experience elsewhere, because I think that our labour market is a very weird thing at the moment, and nobody's been able to explain to me convincingly what exactly is happening and how we deal with it. But maybe someone will. I don't know.
Let me ask Ben and Ridgy, what is it that you both would like to see perhaps change the most, or that would be attractive to the younger business leader? Is there, again, we can't look to government for everything, I'm not suggesting that, but change in thinking.
I think if we have to build on sort of what I think Bim was just talking about, and I think James gave a great example of, workforce and what they do to attract different people within the community or business community. I mean, not long ago, even I'm speaking from a perspective of women in the workforce. Not a very long time ago, there weren't as many, and I think the government and businesses have made a lot of efforts and put lots of steps in place to change that slightly. Of course, the problem hasn't gone away, but there's more to be done. However, I think businesses have a role to play in working and investing in those people that are already either within the company or making it more attractive or easier accessible to attract the right type of people. It could be something as simple as restructuring how we write job adverts and how are we attracting the kind of demographics and people that we think aren't coming in. It could be as different as working alongside these hybrid work from home models, etc., to allow more and more of the people to continue working without feeling the crunch of the old school mentality of I have to do an 8 to 5 and be there, because we have so many digital transformation mechanisms, etc., in place that allow us to work very differently, that will enable more and more people to come into the workforce. And I think the only last sort of piece on that sort of digital transformation is jobs, and upskilling people to meet those jobs is something businesses absolutely need to invest in. It's something we do actively, and I think more and more people need to do it. I think jobs that very, very young people are looking at right now might not even exist by the time they graduate. We might have new jobs like looking for drone operators and God knows what all else in the future. And I think upskilling and investing in these people throughout whatever level they're in, whatever ages they're in, as a constant is going to give them the confidence of either applying for those jobs that they might not need to, or continue retaining that job within the business. So I think this is something we definitely should be doing more of, to invest in our people.
Ben, what would you like to see?
Yeah, I firmly agree with what Riddy said there, especially at the end with regards to upskilling. I think if you see a company that is investing in its employees and upskilling them, giving them more skills, but also increasing their potential for future employment and also for getting promoted. That's something that's incredibly attractive. And I think it's definitely something that the upcoming generation has a keen eye on. Where are they going to get opportunities to advance their career and keep adding new skills under their belt? And I definitely think that's something that the government can support through schemes for sure, but there's also a big responsibility on businesses to take a lead in that. And I would love to see us inputting more of our resources into upskilling in digital skills, Industry 4 skills, and also in sustainable skills as well. We've had a lot of success at Crystal Doors by training and coaching all of our employees on what their carbon footprint is and how they can reduce that both personally and in the workforce and in the factory. And that's given them sort of the drive and the understanding to actually take responsibility for our initiatives themselves and go, yeah, I now understand what my personal footprint is. I understand how it's affecting the workplace and what that means for our planet. I want to get involved too. So it's not just adding more skills to them, it gets them impassioned as well. It gives them something to sink their teeth into.
Brilliant. Just looking for, I tell you what, neither of you have mentioned a broader point, which is sort of housing and public transport. But maybe you didn't think that, but you know, sort of broader infrastructure issues, which I would have thought is affecting the young quite badly, and speaks to Bim's point about the labour market, because, you know, difficulty of getting to and fro jobs. The transport system is pretty awful. Is it 4 hours to, you know, go from coast to coast? I would have thought these are important issues, but that's not something that you are too concerned about.
I wouldn't say not too concerned about. I think we are definitely concerned about it for sure. I mean, I personally travel 3 hours every single day to come and you know, to get into work, and that's not something that and I think I just want to touch on that because it's such a great point that you just mentioned, and I think it's a part of the kind of future generations where we were, at least I was extremely focused on what I can do with the government and how we can influence that. And that's kind of how I feel like most of the future generation is also thinking. But it's on the flip side, absolutely changing something like infrastructure of transport, etc., is not something we are going to be able to do independently at all. And I think I'm not sure, Bim, but maybe you might be able to add to that, is it's definitely a problem right now. I mean, in line with sustainability, it's so much cheaper for me to drive to Birmingham and come back than it is to take a train, and it's not double, it's somewhere close to triple that it costs me, and let alone the time. It's very difficult then in the practical sense to make that choice when, you know, everything else around us prices are rising. And I just picked Birmingham because it's somewhere I need to travel to often. But do you see that as something the government is looking at the moment, focusing on, or how do you see that?
Well, in the spirit of honesty, I would say that I'd be very surprised if anybody in government was looking at this right now. I think things are far too chaotic at the moment. I think your broader point is completely correct. And it goes to what I was saying at the beginning, which is there are just some foundational things that aren't right. And we have an incentive structure around public transport, which works, I'd say, in the commuting areas of London reasonably well, because you can't drive easily into London because parking's a nightmare and it's expensive and traffic's bad and all the rest of it. Sadiq Khan clearly doesn't want cars in London, though, does he? No, he doesn't, and he's made lots of things very miserable. But putting that to one side, so it sort of works, I'd say. But outside London, I mean, you know, particularly in the north, you know, Jim O'Neill, who I'm sure, you know, Jürgen, I'm sure has had many a conversation with about the Northern Bauhaus, and you, James, as well, nodding. I mean, just listening to, for example, Jim about the amount of time spent arguing within government, because he's been in government, outside government, about getting east-west transport right across the northwest. Yeah. And yet we're still not there. And I'm not blaming any individual for this. I'm making the point that unless we deal with some foundational things about why is it that we can be having conversations again and again and again over 10 or 15 years and nothing's really happening, it's not because we're a country of rubbish people. At least I really don't believe that. I think it's because we aren't looking at the fundamentals of, for example, the train system, and working out that if you price going into Birmingham at, I don't know, £100 and it costs you £30 to drive, nobody rationally is going to do that on a commuting basis. You might do it on a one-off, but you're not going to do it on a commuting basis. But nobody seems to even be thinking about that because the way it's all structured doesn't seem to work.
So HS2 and HS3 linking, and it does take 4 hours from Liverpool to Hull, I believe. You have to take 10 different trains and whatever. Now, and it goes back to virtually everything we've been talking about, the economically inactive, cost of whatever. So again, you know, the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years. It does not take, you know, Isambard Brunel would sort of, you know, be dying if he saw what we were doing. Why are we not capable of taking those big, long...
I think there's two
rates were at zero, so it would have cost very little. Why weren't we able to do it?
So I think there are two reasons. The first is that Conservatives generally, and this has really been since the mid-late 70s and the 80s in particular, have sought to focus on increasing private sector dynamism and not really focused on the state beyond trying to make it efficient and effective and making every taxpayer pound stretch as far as possible. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it works a lot better when your thing that you're stretching the taxpayer pound in works pretty well already, and what you're trying to do is to eke out extra efficiencies. So I think the Conservatives find that just intellectually is something that we're just not used to, is thinking about the state and going, in order to achieve the thing that we're trying to achieve in the private sector for growth and dynamism, and all the things the Prime Minister talks about, which, by the way, despite contrary to appearances, I actually think the Conservative Party and voters are quite in favour of. They want dynamism, they want growth, and they want the economy to grow. But the question is obviously, how do you achieve that? And I just don't think that over the last 30, 40 years, we've thought enough as a country about the fact that for the private sector to be effective, the state needs to be effective. It doesn't need to be big, it doesn't need to be expensive, but it does need to work. And I think that unless what we've seen over the last few years, I think COVID showed us this in many areas, and everybody's sort of forgotten about it because it's like a bad dream, but there are a lot of things that weren't working terribly well in this country. And if we can't improve those things, and some of those will require more investment in the short term, it's like in any business. You know, when I was doing M&A deals, I remember it, you know, sometimes you say, God, this business, why are we having to put all this money in? It's like, well, and the smart engineer explains to you, look, if you don't put the money in now, you're not going to get that growth you expect over the next 5 years, and you're not going to make lots of money. And actually, we understand this in business. So I think we've got to take that sort of business-like approach to government and say, where are the investments we need to make with the structures and the system, so that on the private sector side, we can really enable all those brilliant wealth creators and innovators and all the people we champion to get the most done.
We need to be, the state needs to be the facilitator.
Yeah, or even if it doesn't, it's something as simple. You see, a lot of this is quite simple, but it's detail oriented, right? So, for example, let's take East-West Rail, okay? East-West Rail, the biggest problems with that, I can guarantee you, will be funding and it will be planning. They will be the two big problems. It won't be operational. It won't be we don't have the skilled people. Those things will be problems, but you could overcome those. But the reason why those things are problems is because we have not yet worked out within Treasury, within Whitehall, exactly the division between them and the local government. The local government, which local government should be involved? How much, as say, should councils have? The planning is done at a council level a lot of the time, and yet the decision is made at central government level. There are a lot of bitty things that unless you deal with them, you don't really get this East-West thing happening within 5 years rather than 15 or however long it will take.
I mean, aren't we here sort of almost back to the beginning of where we started the conversation? Bim, you said, you know, our institutions are not delivering. Ben at the beginning said, we're too short term. And I think the issue is that we're talking about three huge issues here: transport infrastructure, we've talked about health, and we've talked about our education system. And the issue is you just can't deal with these things in single parliamentary cycles. And so I think on all of those, you need cross-party, you know, at least some independence in terms of really defining the long-term strategy. And just, you know, one quick example, the way that Germany deals with its transport infrastructure, it doesn't come every 30 years and say we need 100 billion for a new high-speed rail line. It just decided 40 years ago, we're going to spend 5 billion a year on high-speed rail. That's it. And that's a cross-party decision. And then as every year goes on, we just plan it out and we just spend that amount of money. Whereas we, you know, we just have these arguments and then somebody says, yes, we'll do it. And then we stop it again. And then we say, yes, we do it. And then we stop it again. So we need cross-party institutions for these huge, huge topics that we, and challenges that we have.
Bib, I know we're running out of time, Maggie, just a really quick one. But to give you an example of what you're saying, which I agree with, prison governors used to have an annual appraisal, and they get marked on various scores. Now, the one thing we know makes a massive difference to reducing reoffending is people getting a job. I found out that the percentage of their appraisal that is applicable for people getting a job on release is 0.9%. So anyway, I managed to get it changed to 20%, and fun enough, the number of people leaving prison in a job has doubled.
Wow.
And that's 9 months. So it goes to show those nuts and bolts things that need to be changed to reflect how the civil service works.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that doesn't cost money. That's not about more government spending. That's not something that lots of smart people did know. But unless you think about it in that sort of way, you're not going to make that sort of. And we'd have spent, God knows how many meetings would have gone into why is it that we can't do this? And we actually, that big change probably did 95% of the work.
Bim, can we just say, if there's another leadership challenge, will you please put your hat in the ring, because you've spoken such.
I think that to talk about such things only 37 days into our dear leaders beginning of what I'm sure will be a very long time in office, I think would be deeply career damaging for them.
Going to slightly put you on the spot, because one of the questions that we wanted to address, and we only got 2 minutes left, is that really goes to the heart of this Truss's bid for leadership was, is this the right moment to go for low tax and drop it and easing up on regulation? And is it unrealistic? What do we mean by growth? Just very quickly.
I mean, regulation and tax are quite different issues, right? I am all in favor of changing regulations where you can to make things easier and less bureaucratic. And I think we should always be looking and saying, you know, when you layer regulations on top of each other, when they're too complicated, we should always be looking to fix those things. I think we should always do those things, actually. In relation to tax, I mean, you've got to know what you're trying to achieve by any particular tax cut. That's the problem. What annoys me about dogma is like, just do the work and go, okay, if I'm going to take away the top rate of tax, which I happen to think, you know, in the right time doesn't make any sense. I happen to think the 40% tax rate for what it's worth should be brought way up. It was never intended to catch people on what now is a very modest middle-earning sort of sum. But if you're going to do that, you've got to think, well, are we doing this for growth? I don't think any evidence shows you that that's going to get you enough growth to make the money back. So you're doing it because you just think it's wrong. That's fine. But if in that context, you aren't also, for example, cutting VAT so that small cafes can't make a bit of extra money in pubs, or you're not also helping middle earners, then that's never going to work, right? It's never going to work. Because frankly, the growth multiplier on increasing the 40p threshold from, say, whatever it is, 43,000 or whatever, up to, say, 80,000, I bet you the growth multiplier is higher, because those people have a higher propensity to spend their money than richer people over 150 grand. Bet you anyone. Now, if you're optimizing for growth, do the right tax cuts for growth, right? Don't just do the, you know, so for me, it's, you've got to know what you're trying to actually achieve, not just say, I've decided I want to do tax cuts, and therefore these are the taxes I understand, I'm going to cut them. What you've got to think of is, what are we trying to do? The alternative, by the way, is you could say, for example, the bankers' bonuses, again, I think it was a silly thing put in. I don't agree with intervening in the labour market in that sort of way. But you've got to think, okay, why are we doing that? If the reason is because people are not attracted to London, that may or may not be true, but I bet you, and knowing that sector as I do pretty well, I think the bigger reasons are access to people, the bank levy that's still there. You know, those are actually bigger reasons why people may not come to London. You know, so I think that that's what you've got to examine.
I mean, it was a policy, should never have been, but the timing was wrong. James, for your business, was it seen as very attractive, the sort of lower taxes and the delay to the corporation tax increase next year and national insurance?
I like paying taxes. The one tax, I think, the two tax things are wrong is the apprenticeship levy, because it just doesn't work, and business rates. It just doesn't work from a property retail perspective. That's why you have towns like, if you take the North Wales coast, Bangor and Rhyl, half the shops are shut, and it's because the business rates is causing the problems.
James, do you think we should do some sort of online tax? Is that what you think we should replace with?
I would put VAT up by 2.5% and scrap business rates, and that's basically the same amount of money.
Is
and
it
then the same amount of money and gets around the problem.
But put VAT up. Very interesting. Okay.
The problem with that, by the way, is that off the top of my head, and I'll probably get this wrong, but when you look at the exemptions now on business rates, the problem is we've now taken the coward's way out, and we've just sort of exempted more and more small shops from business rates, which means that the dependence on business rates is falling on fewer and fewer businesses. And so if you were to make the decision that you suggested, James, which I think seems reasonable on the face of it, you'd then be penalizing a lot of smaller shops who are actually now not paying any business rates at all, right? And so you can see the difficulty. I have sympathy with the difficulty of replacing business rates, because it's, you know, a lot of people have tried.
It just seemed to me, what in closing, that if the government was so intent on growth, which obviously is a good, as long as it's healthy growth, it's a good ambition to have, why there wasn't more done to for incentives for new businesses, well, all businesses actually, but, you know, perhaps increase R&D allowances, training allowances, EIS schemes. I mean, you know, just about everyone, either you want to be a footballer or start your own business these days, but, you know, EIS, SEIS, those sort of things right on the ground, I would have thought would be much more conducive to healthy growth. But there we go. No, for the next budget, maybe then. Anyway, we've gone past our time. Thank you all so much for a fascinating discussion, all of you. And I'm going to hand over to Jürgen, who would like to say a few closing words.
Well, thank you very much. And let me, as co-host here, because this has been co-hosted by Vocal and Reaction. Reaction Media is where Maggie is editor, and it's been, Maggie, a pleasure to co-host and partner with you on this. So thank you very much for hosting us, and a quick plug to Reaction Media as well. It's a great media site, and I think gives sometimes a slightly more impartial view than we see in some of our other media. So do go on to reaction.life to view the media there. Thank you, of course, to all the panelists. And I want to say a special thank you to Ben and Riddy, because we want to make these sessions about our next generation leadership. So thank you for your contributions today. And finally, Vocal is all about responsible business leaders, particularly of the next generation, having a more responsible voice. If you'd like to join in more of those conversations, then do go to our website, vocal.uk, download our app, and on our app, you can register. It's very simple and free to register, and you can join in these sorts of conversations there, and there will be many more of them. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Again, thank you for the panel. And I think with that, we will say have a good evening. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye.